Welcome to the tutorial by the prophet of the singularity.
Hello and welcome to my video on making AI animations with Disco Diffusion. And part one, we are going to focus on 2D mode, 3D mode, and prompt weights. So I'm going to start here with just a little bit of a preamble. I want to cover everything and there is a lot of ground to cover. So I will be breaking this series up into at least 3 videos. So making videos with Disco Diffusion, they can be one of the most visually impressive things you can do with it. And it offers you 3 ways to do this. Now, it can also be one of the most time consuming and frustrating things if you spend a lot of time making a video and it started off looking good and you come back a few hours later and it's gone to heck. That is why I'm making a lot of videos on this. My goal is to cover every setting and feature. So the very first thing here, if you see I'm already in animation mode here, and I'm going to show you these options here. We have none, which is what we always use to make our still images. We have 2D, 3D, and video input. And we're just going to be going over 2D and 3D today. And we'll start here with 2D. Now, these first 2 settings here, we are going to ignore. These will only apply if we're using a source video to make our animation, which we are not. And then we are going to go down here. This is going to be the first important spot, and this is where you will do most of your work for animations, is right here. This is the important section here for animations. Now, there is no, you'll notice it says 2D animation settings. So there is no 3D animation settings. This is because you actually use a lot of the same settings for both methods, but some of them behave differently, and I'll just kind of go down the list here. We're just doing the 2D right now. So the keyframes, this will apply to whatever kind of animation you're making. This sets the total number of frames you are generating for your movie. So right now I just have it 200 frames. I'm just going to do 200 frames right now for both of these videos. You can set this up as high as you want. Just keep in mind that each of these frames, it's rendering a complete image, so these can take a while to make. Now, these first 2 settings here, angle, zoom, translation X, and translation Y. These are used by 2D. None of the other settings down here are used by 2D. From Z on down, these are just used by 3D, and we'll get into those later. So the first setting here is the angle. So what the angle does is this rotates the camera like it's doing a circle. Like if you're an airplane, it starts rolling over. That's what the angle does. So positive values will rotate your image clockwise, and negative values will always do the opposite. So the next setting down here is zoom, and I'm just gonna default this, get rid of this for now, and just put it on 1.1, which I believe is the default. So this will zoom your camera in and out, and I'm gonna go over these settings here in more detail here in just a minute. I'm just gonna kind of go through them real quick right now. The next setting is translation X. What that will do is that would now in 2D mode, what we're actually moving with these settings is the image itself. So think of the image as a canvas in front of you as a painter, and what we do here affects where that painting is. So X, what that does is this will move, positive values will move the image to the right. So that'll actually, though, when the image moves to the right, that'll make your camera kind of go to the left. So you kind of got to think of it in opposite terms when you're doing this. So by moving the image to the right, that will shift our point of view to the left. Now the Y will shift the image up and down. So a positive value shifts it down, which will actually look like we're going up, and a negative value will shift it up, which will look like we're going down. So it's kind of opposite there. So that's all we need to worry about for the 2D settings. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually exit the notebook now. What I usually do is I will go out and I will kind of plan my animation out just in a notepad file or something. So I'm not, because I don't want to have my GPU running, while I'm sitting here thinking about, okay, what am I going to do here? So it's just a better way to make use of your processing time, which can be limited, as well as help you to kind of plan it out a little bit better. So I'm going to go out there and I'll show you what I do in my notebook. So this first parameter here is the angle. So what this parameter does is it can make your camera spin around in a circle. It will actually make the canvas in 2D mode. Remember, are seen as kind of like a canvas in front of us. So this will make the canvas spin counterclockwise. And so at keyframe 0, it's not going to be doing anything. At keyframe 150, it's going to start spinning. And again, we have 200 keyframes in the video. So for about the last 1/4 of the video, it's going to start to spin the canvas. So we start off here with a 1.1 zoom. So it's going to kind of start off by zooming in at keyframe 0. So these are the values over here. So the zoom has a value you can enter between 0.8 and 1.25. So this value is a percentage, which is different than the way most of them are. Like this one up here is a value between -3 and 3 for the clockwise. So a positive, anything above 1 will zoom in, and any percentage below 1, which you can go down to 0.8, will zoom out. So right now our video is going to start with us zooming in on the canvas. Then at keyframe 50, it will start to zoom out. And then at keyframe 100, it will zoom in again for the rest of the video. Okay, so that is the only changes that I'm going to do here. This moves the canvas left and right. This moves it up and down. So we could add this, but I'm just going to kind of keep this simple just to show you how you enter these parameters. Okay, so now I'm going to just go ahead and copy this, go back in the notebook, and enter my movement parameters for our animation scene. Okay, we are back in the notebook, and again here we have the keyframes turned on. We have the max frames at 200, and I'm now going to enter my change here I did for the angle, which again, this will start the camera rotating at keyframe 150. So at keyframe 150, it's going to start to rotate the canvas clockwise, and now I'm going to go ahead and enter my changes for the zoom as well. Okay, and the zoom, it'll start off zooming in. It will then at keyframe 50 back out a little bit with that 0.8, and then at keyframe 100 it will zoom in for the rest of the video. And these values, none of these will affect the 2D animation mode. So the next value we want to go to, yeah, the FOV only works with 3D as well. And these ones, let me show you, from here to here, the guide says never change these settings. And by the way, I do have a link for Zippy's Disco Diffusion cheat sheet. That is a extremely good resource for settings and things like that we're doing right now. That has all this information in it as well as diagrams and things. So we're going to leave all this alone. Turbo mode is also only for 3D mode. So the first thing we're going to get to here next is the coherency settings, which this will apply for both 2D and 3D. So what these coherency settings do is they're kind of similar to the skip steps in when you're using a starting image. So the frame scale will try to guide the new frame to looking like the old one. And I just have mine set at 900. Now I will at a later tutorial, I'm going to post a tutorial, kind of an appendum to this, where I'm just going to show what the extremes of these settings do and get a little more into it. So I'm not going to get really into the rest of these. Today I just want to kind of show you the movement and the just the basics kind of the animation. So I just have that at 900. Now the frame skip steps, that'll use, if you have it higher, it'll make the next frame it renders, because each new frame it's rendering, it'll use the old frame as a guide. If you have this high, it'll make it more closely resemble the old frame. So it's good to create a consistent scene where things aren't changing all the time. If you notice a lot of AI videos, like nothing stays the same, stuff is kind of constantly changing. So you can turn this up really high and get rid of that effect. But then if you're zooming in, since things aren't changing, it'll kind of start to lose detail and get weird. So for now, I'm just leaving that as 50. These next two only apply if you have a starting video. VR mode, I think that's it for animation. So really that's all. You don't need to change a lot here to make a animation in 2D mode. Okay, I am back in my notebook now. Now I have connected and ran everything. I want to show you one other thing you should probably do before you start the animation. The first thing I'll usually do is first put my animation mode on none and then just render an image. Just make sure that that image you're getting is what you want. Otherwise, you're going to have 300 frames of something, that may not turn out that good. So it's actually a good idea to do it, maybe 2 or 3 times. Just make sure it's kind of consistent. And then the other thing you can do is kind of watch the animation when it starts. And if it's a good image, then just let it go. If it's not, just stop it and restart it. Maybe you'll get, a better random image this time. So I'm just going to do that and let the image run. Okay, and while it's running here, it looks like that'll be good enough. I just wanted to go for a castle in a fantasy landscape. Now also just kind of run down these settings I'm using. You can always change these to, you want to make sure the other thing I'll do is I'll check my resources while I'm running and make sure this doesn't go into the red. Like if you're in the red, you might need to change your image smaller or use less models. Because if it's going into the red, then at some point your animation might lose color. You'll get bad renders with a lot of like blank spots right now. So I got a Tesla V100 right now. It's pretty good, and I've got that's what I usually get here with the Google Colab Pro. So that's a pretty good one. But so I'm running VBit 32, the 16, and the RN50. So if I had like a P100, I'd probably cut one of these models out and maybe even resize my image a bit. But right now I'm just doing it 512 by 512. I've got my clip guidance at 40,000. Oh yeah, and cut and batches. Always turn your cut batches down to 1 when you're making an animation. And if it makes your image look bad, then just retool, rework the image until it looks good. Because if you have more than one here, it'll take a really long time for it to generate your images. Remember, it has to make an image for every frame. And your key steps do get taken into fact too. It'll make each new image using half of what your key steps are. So I rendered my first one at 200. That's what gave me the initial image. And then it's going to render each additional image with only 100. Okay, and then we've already gone through the animation settings I've used here. Right now I'm in none, but I changed my keyframes here so that it's going to zoom in, zoom out, zoom back in again, and then start spinning around with the angle here. Now this stuff isn't going to affect it because it's not in 3D mode. So if you have the new notebook, some of the things in animation I wouldn't run unless you're using it. It might cut into your memory and everything, like this install RAF. This is only for video input. So I didn't just run. What I mean by that is I didn't just go like this and just run this because that'll run everything in it. So I actually went in and kind of ran these things individually with this new notebook. I'm going to be doing that for a while. Okay, and that looks good. So now I'm going to go ahead and go start the run of 200 images. Okay, and I'm going to start the run again. And actually, oh, here's one other thing. I just did that so I could kind of look at my image, but get this up pretty high because it'll speed up your render too. You don't want it to be displaying every 20 frames, or maybe even just turn it off. So what I'm doing now, I'm just checking my resources, make sure I'm staying in the green, which should be no problem right now. And then I'm gonna just look at the first image, and then if it's good to go, then I just let it run. I'll let it run the 200 frames and come back. Okay, our 2D animation mode has finished. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and go find it in my folder and download all the images. I've never been able to get this to work right, or I've had problems with it, so I usually don't even mess with this. I'll just go and download the individual frames in my folder in my Google Drive and then just import them into my movie editor and make a movie out of them. Okay, so here's the final render, and like I said, I usually don't use 2D mode, so I did put kind of some extreme values on it, so it's going pretty fast. I did also slow this down by about 50%, but you'll see it zoomed in, then it zoomed out, now it's zooming back in again. So what we're going to do though now is I'm going to show you the 3D animation, and this is the one I've probably done more of. So I'm going to I've already put this in 3D mode here, so it was 2D, so I changed this to 3D. So the values, they act differently in 2D mode and 3D mode, but you still change them all in this section right here. You still use the same section to change them. And we're not going to need to change the angle and zoom. What will happen is in 3D mode, it's just going to basically ignore these values. So in 3D mode, like in 2D mode, it's kind of like you're seeing as a canvas in front of you, and in your commands move the canvas or zoom in on it, that kind of thing. In 3D mode, it's a little different. It's kind of like you put a little camera inside the scene itself, and it's like it's a little 3D world. So the values for the 3D mode are a little different. In the translation X, what those will do is the X is the left and right. So a positive, and that value again, all these are between -10 and 10. So a positive value in X will move your camera in the scene to the right. A negative value will move it to the left. A positive value in Y will move it up and down. So a positive value will move it up in Y, and a negative value will move it down. Now the Z is similar to the zoom function in the 2D mode. So this is going to be our zoom here. So I've already kind of adjusted it. So at keyframe 0, I have it 2. It'll start going forward. Now at keyframe 50, it's going to start going backwards at -2. And again, these values are between -10 and 10. Then the next keyframe is keyframe 100. That has a value 2, so it'll stop going backwards at keyframe 100 and then go forward for the rest of the video. Okay, now the 3D rotations here, think of these as like just turning the camera. Now these values are a little different. These are between -3 and 3, so they're a little smaller, so the changes will have a little bigger effect since it's not as wide of a range. So the rotation 3DX, what this will do is this will roll the camera around. This will shift the camera either up or down, like shifting the nose of a plane. So a positive value will shift the nose up, a negative value will shift the nose down. So it's like you're looking up and down. So the Y value, what this will do is rotate the camera right and left. So it's kind of like turning your head to the right and left. So a positive value will turn right and a negative value will turn left. And I'll also post a picture here in the video from Zippy's Disco Diffusion cheat sheet that'll show you a little diagram of these rotations. And that's an extremely useful document. I have a link down there below it. I really recommend you get that as a reference. Now this last one here, this rotation 3DZ, this is the one we're going to change to emulate the angle. So this is actually our barrel roll. This is what'll circle our plane around, kind of rotate, which is what I wanted to do for this one to emulate what we did in the last one. So this one we're going to start at 0, and then at keyframe 150, we're going to start rotating to the right. So a positive number is a clockwise rotation, a negative number is a counterclockwise rotation. Okay, we have now started the run here, and I'll come check back after it's done. We've got about 200 frames here to do. Okay, the animation is done, and that only took slightly less than an hour compared to about the 3 hours of the 2D mode. So I'm going to go ahead now and make a video out of this one, and then we can compare them. Okay, now there's one more thing. So I've shown you how to do movement in both the 2D and the 3D mode. And like I said, I usually just use the 3D mode, but you can get really complex with just the movement. You know, you can do these keyframes and have it constantly changing views, but there's one other thing that really also allow you to introduce a storytelling element almost to the movies, even though, you know, usually it's better just making kind of abstract things, but there is something here really cool you can do, which is changing the prompt, which will actually change the image that it's generating. So the first thing I'm going to do though to demonstrate this is just turn all the camera movement down to 0. So we're not going to have any camera movement on this final video here. Okay, now I'm still going to leave it in animation mode. So what we're going to do here though is we're going to go down to our text prompt. Now we change the keyframes in the text prompt just in the same spot we usually do. And actually, if when you first open this up, when you first open the notebook up, there is another keyframe in the default, but I usually erase mine. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to enter another keyframe there. And then also, this is important too, we're going to use weights. So what weights do is they tell Disco Diffusion how important the prompt is to render. And so let me just kind of demonstrate here. So right now I'm keeping all of this original prompt here in one set of quotes, if you notice. And then I'm going to make a new set of quote here that's going to say summer flowers. I'm going to give that a weight of 1. And it has to be, for this weight to apply, it has to be have a quote, and this is only going to affect summer flowers. It's not going to affect any of this other prompt. That's why I isolated it there. And then for the next one here, I'm going to write winter snow, and I'm going to give that a prompt of 0. And then I'm just going to copy this whole thing here as well. And a lot of times I'll write these actually outside of the Disco Diffusion notebook. I'll just do it like in a notepad file and kind of organize it. Okay, and then for this next one here, I'm just going to change the summer flowers to 0 and the winter snow to 1. So what this should do is when it hits keyframe 100, it will stop adding. It's going to generate all this other stuff that's in there, the illustration of a castle and a fantasy landscape, etc. It's going to generate that in both prompts. But then I have this winter snow here in quotes at 0 and summer flowers at 1. And so it's going to generate summer flowers here, but not winter snow. And then when it gets to keyframe 100, then it should stop generating summer flowers and start generating winter snow. That's the idea behind this prompt here. Okay, our run has started now. If you notice up here in the prompt, it's showing that it's doing the whole prompt here, and it has a value of 1 on the summer flowers and 0 on the winter snow. And then when it hits frame number 100, then it should reverse the values here between 1 and 0. And I'll go ahead and check back when it's done, and we'll load up the video. Okay, and that will wrap this video up. We have our summer scene here, but remember, winter is coming. This went a little long. There's a lot of ground covered, like I said, and there are more tutorials about animation in the works. Thank you for watching.